So we actually get a little bit more information on what happened in Ohara this chapter. But before that, I'm Charlie, and welcome back to the Straw Hat Duo. Today we're going over chapter 1066 of One Piece, titled The Will of Ohara. The cover page story is Germa 66's Cold-Blooded Voyage, volume 23. And it's returning to the Germa with company. So Caesar and the Germa siblings all get back to the homeland, the fortress on the water. So I was actually just reading this, and apparently in the notes on the chapter, Oda just apparently got a new gas grill recently, and he's learning to cook meat via convention. And he can't wait till everybody gets to try it. So that's a little interesting. This chapter, we start right out where we left off in the last chapter. We have zoomed out of Egghead. We could see a little bit more, and we hear them going, what are you saying? You know, futuristic city like this couldn't have existed in the past. Vegapunk 1, it's just like, yeah, it's just a conjecture, which seems like it's a tagline of his because he says it a ton. He goes on to continue saying, you know, I once knew a passionate archaeologist that risked his life to learn about a certain ancient kingdom. Not only that, at a certain site, some machinery was excavated that dated back to the same era as the kingdom. And Robin's like, what are you saying? That machinery was made during the Void Century? I think he's more or less implying it was made before the Void Century. Or could have been during the Void Century. 100 years is a fairly long time. At this point, Nami kind of looks back at Robin. She's like, you know something about this, Robin? And Vegapunk keeps going back into it. He's like, no doubt it's a painful memory, but 22 years ago, your home, Ohara, was destroyed by a buster call. Vegapunk thinks that it happened because Ohara uncovered details of the kingdom's existence. He believes the history of the Void Century is a history of conflict, a war between the 20 nations and the Forgotten Kingdom, which now seems like it was an advanced kingdom. The 20 kingdoms ended up being victorious, and that's why the world government is trying to now erase history of them. Now, he's saying that because the world government won, the world government that we know now, the 20 kingdoms, won, they're trying to erase existence of the ancient kingdom and any history and knowledge that went with it. Sanji, Usopp, and Nami are all shocked. Frankie is shocked and excited. Sanji kind of brings up a point, and he's like, so wait, you mean everybody who knows about this? And Vegapunk just kind of cuts him off right there. He says, it's eliminated? Yeah, that's pretty much it. Usopp's like, wait, why'd you tell us? I can't unhear it. And bends backwards and slams his head on the ground because their feet are still stuck to the floor. Then Vegapunk goes, yeah, like I said, it's just a conjecture, you know, just a thought. I don't know. Could be true. Seems to be true, but I don't know. Vegapunk at this point looks back at Robin and says, so tell me, Nico Robin, if I'm right, and the discovery is why Ohara was wiped out, then wouldn't the world government's actions be, you know, a confirmation of what I was just saying? Robin at this point says, well, why are you asking me about this? You know, the scholars did devise a theory after all in their extensive research, but wouldn't somebody as high up as you in the government be privy to this information? And Vegapunk kind of lets on what we all kind of thought. It's like, unfortunately, government affiliation makes no difference. I'm kept in the dark like everyone else. Even bringing up this topic would result in my immediate erasure, which, you know, epic foreshadowing. CP0's on the way. Usopp kind of stands up at this point. He's like, why are you telling us this? This is just torture. Let us get out of here. Robin gets a little bit more passionate at this point. She's like, if that's true, how could you know they're researching that kingdom? All the books on Ohara were on Ohara, and Vegapunk cuts her off. It says, the will of Ohara lives on, which is the name of the chapter. Vegapunk continues on with his story, and he's like, that day shocked the world. In a single night, Ohara, the island of research, the island known for its love of knowledge, was wiped out, save for one little girl. And it shows a picture of Robin's wanted poster when she was a little girl for 79 million berries. You see Robin starting to get a little bit sad at this point. And then Vegapunk continues, the scholars were labeled as devils, descendants who plotted to overthrow the government. A few months after the incident, I paid a visit of my own to the scorched earth of Ohara. I was acquainted with Professor Clover, the foremost authority on archaeology archaeology. I figured at least somebody should leave some flowers for him. And Robin is shocked at this. She's like, wait, you knew Professor? And we get a little like reminiscence back of Clover in his younger years. He was on a ship holding a sword. He looks like a pirate. He was probably labeled a pirate, much like the Nox pirates from Zoe. They set out for knowledge. They got labeled as pirates because they're seeking out poneglyph knowledge. His obsession with it fueled a very adventurous lifestyle, which left him searching the world, such as a pirate, and the Marines incarcerated him apparently on at least 10 occasions. By the time he settled down, he was the world's most famous archaeologist. She's like, over time, countless scholars were drawn to him, and they all flocked to O'Hara, and that's why it became the holy land of archaeology. Unfortunately, the aftermath of those talented minds coming together proved tragic. It was the result of they did a little bit too much digging and got wiped out by the government. He's like, when I stepped foot on O'Hara, even the tree of knowledge had been burned to cinders. I was speechless when I saw it. Tree of knowledge, from my understanding, is the oldest thing that we have dated in One Piece. I don't remember the exact age, but it's much longer than the Void Century ago. A couple thousand years, I believe. Robin could eventually, continue to research beyond just the Void Century, just seeing what the world government's erased at this point. Vegapunk then says, but the lake at the center of the island was filled with an unbelievable number of books. He's like, yeah, I could only assume that it was the work of the scholars, giving their last dying breath to save as much knowledge as they could from the burning. So to ensure that the future had access to their treasure trove of knowledge. And he says, if any Marines did discover the books, they were apparently too ignorant to understand their value and left them be. O'Hara had trumpeted over them. When I realized that, I couldn't stop myself from crying. So at this point, we get a little flashback of Robin. She's kind of remembering her last little bit with her mother. Her mom, says, I still have a duty to do here. Robin cries, says, I don't want to leave you. Present day, she starts to tear up a little bit. But she wasn't aware, as far as I know, of the archaeologists throwing all the books into the lake. So we see that happening in the flashback. We see Sol and Olvia sitting there talking to Robin and telling her, you've got to go. We can't just give up on your future. Then we see Sol in that flashback holding Robin, running away with her, saying, your mom's a honorable woman. O'Hara stood up to the world. And then we hear the bang. And in present day, like the bang of when Olvia, I believe, got shot, in present day, we see Robin, big frown on her face, full on crying at this point. Sanji, and it looks like Frankie at this point, get all pissed off at Vegapunk. They're like, you helmet wearing bastard, how dare you make Robin cry? That's it, Vegapunk, you better release these shoes. And then Robin speaks up. She's like, it's just as you said. They came to a conclusion about the kingdom before the incident. Vegapunk's like, oh, okay, so it is true. Robin's like, so where are the books now? Vegapunk mentions that he really wanted to take him back to Punk Hazard, but he knew if the higher-ups ever caught wind of it, it'd be all over. He'd be killed for having the books, and the books would then be destroyed. So instead, when he was there, he saw people, they're giants, and we have another flashback, and it's 22 years ago, O'Hara in the West Blue, and it's a few months after the Buster Call incident. And Vegapunk's like, somebody else is visiting the debris. And we actually see Vegapunk here. He's a guy, big tongue sticking out, giant head. Just picture Johnny Bravo level of head, just instead of hair, it's all head. Huge head. But Vegapunk saw the giants in the lake pulling the books out, excavating all of them and bringing them to Elbath. He kind of had some questions of, do these people know how important those books really are? As he's pondering that, Dragon pops up behind him. Surprise, surprise. But Dragon standing up on a mountain behind him says, Vegapunk, it's been a while. As usual, that head makes you stand out. Vegapunk turns around and pretty much sees Dragon. And now we see Dragon in his normal overcoat, Vegapunk in like a dress shirt kind of thing. And they're both holding flowers for Clover. But Vegapunk's like, what are you doing here, Dragon? Dragon pretty much says, I knew Clover. And Vegapunk's like, oh, really? You too? I knew he was a bit of a hooligan, but all this nonsense about trying to destroy the world, that's just propaganda. And we get some name tags here. Dr. Vegapunk, head of Punk Hazard Laboratory, 43 years old, and Monkey D. Dragon, head of the Freedom Fighters, not the Revolutionaries at this time. At this point, they were still just the Freedom Fighters. And he was 33 years old. So this was 22 years ago. That means Vegapunk is now 65 and Dragon is now 55. alive. We get ages for both of them now. That's cool. Then Dragon, says, are you worried about the giants? They're not scavengers. I had a word with them just now. It seems they're from Elbath, and they are fully aware of the importance of the books. They're going to take him back to Elbath for safekeeping. Then he says their captain was a strange giant wrapped from head to toe in bandages. He said that O'Hara sacrificed itself for those treasures, and he couldn't let them be erased from history. And then goes on, seeing a government lackey like you kind of had me worried. I'm glad you're not here to scoop them up and keep them safe. And Vegapunk's like, hey, I'd never. Dragon kind of cuts him off. He's like, yeah, you passed on joining the Freedom Fighters a while ago, but it still made me sick to hear that you became a government lapdog. Vegapunk's like, don't be stupid. Your operation was always too poor to fund my research. My knowledge does nothing if I can't build anything. Dragon's like, yeah, I know. You're as blunt as ever. Vegapunk continues. He's like, the world government is a insanely huge organization. There are plenty of decent people on the inside that can be reasoned with, especially in the Navy. Don't lose sight of the goal. End goal in Dragon. And Dragon's like, I get it, but I just can't sit back after this. This is too much. This was pretty much what it seems to be the start of the Revolutionary Army. Dragon's like, those harmless scholars were brutally snuffed out just for questioning their authority. It's a farce. I'm going to raise an army that can fight them head on. And this is where we actually learn a little bit more about Dragon. Apparently, Vegapunk's like, I thought you hated war. That we didn't know. We didn't know that Dragon was a pacifist, I guess. He's not a fan of war. So he did this out of necessity, not out of spite, not out of rage or anything like that. He believes it's necessary to actually fight back against the world government. He says here is like, just watch Vegapunk, I'll change the world. The will of O'Hara won't die with Clover. And within a year, he, Ivankov, and Kuma, were the founding members of the Revolutionary Army, which is still around to this day. And we get back to the present at this point, and Usopp's like, did you say Elbath? So we are almost definitely now visiting Elbath, so that's cool. Character development for Usopp, character development for Robin, and possibly Frankie, depending on what kind of research is there. Bet you there's some blueprints, and Frankie would love to get his hands on some blueprints. Nami's like, wow, Luffy's dad sounds intense. Robin's like, wait, so Clover's fate motivated Dragon? Frankie's like, my head's gonna blow. Why did Kuma help us? And why did you modify him so much? Vegapunk? Sanji's like, Eva, that bastard, he was one of the founding members of the Revolutionaries? So that's actually kind of surprising. I was under the impression that Sanji knew who Ivankov was, because obviously they're more in the loop than Luffy was. Luffy, it's obvious he doesn't know anything about the world, really. I thought Sanji would have known that Ivankov was one of the founding members of the Revolutionaries. Vegapunk just continues, just ignoring all of what they just said pretty much, and says, the books from O'Hara certainly couldn't be left to be found by the government, but my curiosity compelled me to make a discreet trip to Elbath. And pretty much he went to Elbath, got permission from the giants, and read every single one of their books, every single one of the books that was there, and memorized them all, and said it's all in his head. And he's continued their research, which that's pretty crazy. At this point, Robin is kind of smiling but crying, and she's like, that giant captain, he was called Saul, wasn't he? And Vegapunk's like, he's in hiding now, so I can't confirm anything. So Saul might still be alive. That's pretty cool. Jaguar D Saul, another ally for the Straw Hat crew. Shayna's actually probably about halfway through Dressrosa, I think. There's some things going on with that, and honestly, second time watching through Dressrosa with her, it doesn't seem terribly drawn out. It could just be that she watches a handful of episodes while I'm at work, so I get to skip a lot of the filler. Dressrosa, the second time around, watching it with her has been a bit more enjoyable. Anyways, back to this. Robin's like, thank you, Dr. Vegapunk. Thank you for not letting O'Hara's sacrifice be in vain. Vegapunk's like, I try and help progress at every possible field of thought. It's my nature as a scholar. So, Vegapunk is kind of like Frankie and Robin put together. Yeah, their personalities don't mesh, but their thought processes. So at this point, the boots actually start sliding forward. They freak out. They're like, the shoes are moving on their own. And Vegapunk's like, I can't release you just yet. Follow me. There's something I want to show you. We cut away from them at this point. We cut back over to the junkyard where Luffy's group is, and they're sitting there trying their hardest to get the robot to move. The giant robot. Luffy and Chopper are sitting there yelling at it, trying to yell commands to it, trying to get in. They can't figure out anything out. All of a sudden, it looks like shockwaves start to move out from the robot and they all freak out. One of them's like, the robot's gonna blow. They stop freaking out a little bit as somebody pops out, which we recognize as Dr. Vegapunk. He's still got the long tongue, but his head, instead of being giant, looks like it's got like an apple on top. So it's like cut off like right where a normal head would be and plopped on top as an apple top. He pops out of the robot like through the metal, like Vegapunk Lilith walked through the door, but he's popping out of the robot like that, and he's like, save me, Quasar, which I'm not sure what Quasar is. I imagine that's probably one of his assistants or something. He's like, no good, another debacle. Somebody please save me, Quasar. It could just be how he ends out at sentences. He's like, perhaps space-time bent mid-warp. Maybe he can teleport. I don't know how that works, but yeah, I don't know. Luffy at this point, he's like, oh, wait a minute. There's a guy here, just like Kinemon, because you only see half of him. And Vegapunk starts sinking into the robot at this point. And Luffy jumps in, says, I gotcha, and starts pulling him out. Once Vegapunk is pulled out, his code actually does say SSG also. So that's interesting. He's like, much obliged. You're Dragon's boy, right? I knew you'd come. Good job on making it. Bonnie freaks out. She's like, it's him. Vegapunk just kind of starts floating and says, oh, Bonnie, you sure have gotten big. Luffy's like, wait, how are you floating, old man? He's like, splendid to see you so full of vigor. She screams at him, Vegapunk. At this point, Vegapunk looks back at Luffy, goes, you can float too with those Dom shoes you're wearing. They have another nifty hover function. And they were like, what? Yeah, really? Vegapunk kind of leans down and says, yeah, you see this button here on the side? Grab the lever and give it a push. They're like this, and they launch into the air. Luffy, he's having the time of his life. Vegapunk, he's sweating. He's like, oh, yep, save us, Quasar. And Chopper, he's freaking out. We don't actually see Bonnie in that last panel. I'm curious on how that's going to be resolved. Now that we know that Dragon and Vegapunk are definitely aligned in a sense, I'm very curious on what happened with Kuma. There's no way that Vegapunk actually went through and did the erasure of his memories and all that. There's still a personality somewhere that he can restore, or the original personality is on one of the SSGs on the island. So I'm curious on how that's going to resolve with Bonnie. That was the end of the chapter. It doesn't say break next week, so I believe we have a chapter again next week. I don't know how the chapter next week is going to go. It could be another split between Robin's group and Luffy's group again. I think if it is, we'd focus more on Luffy's group. We could get an update with Law. We could get an update with Sabo. We could get an update with Blackbeard. Well, that'd be with Law. We could get an update with CP0. That would actually make some sense. Now that everybody's starting to meet, it would give a reason to kind of keep the group split. That's what I'm leaning towards. I think we're going to get an update with CP0 and them landing on Egghead. Maybe we'll get a chapter of just Zoro and Brook drinking tea and talking. Let me know what you thought about this chapter, and we'll see you in the next one. Bye.